Joining me now is Gordon Chang. Mr. Chang, welcome back to the broadcast. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you so much, Brannon. I really appreciate it.
Great to have you with us as always. All right, so here we go. Israel has hit Iran. Iran has fired back somewhere around 300 ballistic missiles. Some of them got through today, hitting Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. We had about an hour and a half live broadcast today on our 74 stations, as well as TV, showing that today. So the question is, now that the U.S. is involved, the U.S. is helping shoot down some of these missiles. What is China and what is Russia or North Korea prepared to do? What are they saying? And is this the beginning of a World War III scenario? Is it going to, I mean, I think it's kind of been going on in some level, some degree, but is it about to really kick off now? Will this be the place where people look back and say, yeah, World War III began on June 12th, 2025?
That's possible. They also might say that the war began on October 7th, 2023.
Wow.
Could be February 24, 2022, or they might even go as far back as August 2021 with the catastrophic withdrawal from the United States from Afghanistan. You know, what we can say is this, that withdrawal from Afghanistan really shook up the world. And I think that what it showed was the incapability of the Biden administration. And therefore, Vladimir Putin thought that he could invade Ukraine. And then we see basically a continued erosion and a breaking apart of the world. You know, it's not just Ukraine, it's not just Israel and Iran. It's also North Africa, where we are seeing insurgencies fueled by China and Russia. And those insurgencies look like wars. And God knows what's going to happen in East Asia. So, yes, people might, say that the 12th was the start of World War III, but it's really been a continuum.
So what does China do, if anything?
Well, China has issued some words about what they don't want to see Iran's territorial sovereignty violated, and basically condemning Israel. But there's very little that China can actually do right now. And the point is that China looks, its diplomacy looks to be in retreat in the Middle East. If we go back a year, China looked ascendant. They had the Beijing Declaration of July of last year, where they got the 14 Palestinian groups to sign a unity document. And before that, China brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And so China looked like it was driving events. But for various reasons, it looks to be in retreat. The Palestinian Declaration, that fell apart. Obviously, Saudi Arabia and Iran are no longer on the same page, and China just basically doesn't know what to do. So I think that this is a confirmation that Beijing is not power in the Middle East like everyone thought it was.
How does this impact the BRICS banking system, or does it?
Well, I don't think that it does. I mean, China obviously wants to replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. The BRICS are not really a vehicle to do that. The reason is that BRICS have an eye. That eye is India, and India does not want the grouping to be used as an anti-Western organization. So as long as India is in BRICS, it's going to be an ineffectual group. If India leaves, then I'd worry a little bit more about the BRICS. But remember, we're dealing with a lot of weak states. So you've got Russia, which is hands full in Ukraine, South Africa. You know, South Africa is having problems all across the board. So, you know, and China is an economy which is in distress and a regime which seems to be preoccupied by infighting. So I'm not really that concerned about the BRICS.
All right, let's turn to Taiwan. What is your latest on Taiwan? And particularly if America finds itself getting more involved in a war in the Middle East, does that do anything to your timetable of China maybe doing a blockade around Taiwan?
I think that what's going on in China right now is, especially in the regime, is the dominant factor. And that is, we see that Xi Jinping has lost great influence over and maybe even control of the Chinese military. His number one guy in the military, a guy named General He Weidong, has not been seen in public since March 11th. This was Xi Jinping's hatchet man. And, people say, well, Xi Jinping got rid of his own guy, but that's pretty unlikely. And the reason is, since July 9th of last year, PLA Daily, which is the propaganda organ of the Chinese military, has been running articles praising, quote unquote, collective leadership. That's a direct attack on Xi Jinping's one-man style of rule and demand for complete obedience. So these articles could not have been run if Xi Jinping were controlling the Chinese military. At the same time, we are seeing signs that Xi Jinping has lost influence among civilian leaders. So, for instance, in China's propaganda organs, he's not shown directing the Politburo. He's just basically there with ceremonial functions, like meeting Lukashenko or, opening up, some sort of center. But it's really been minor stuff. And that's a hint, not direct evidence, but that's a hint that Xi Jinping has also lost influence in civilian realm. The reason why I go through all of this is because he probably doesn't have the authority to actually launch an invasion of the main island of Taiwan, or a blockade for that matter. That would require him to give almost complete control of the Chinese military to some flag officer, because going after Taiwan's main island requires an air, land, sea operation. Something, by the way, that China, in its thousands of years of history, has never done. Even in the calmest of times, Xi Jinping would be loath to give a general or admiral such power, making that figure the most powerful person in China. And especially right now, even if he had the authority to order that, he's not about to give somebody such complete control over the military. So at least that's safe. That's not to say that there won't be a war in East Asia, because right now China is engaged in some very belligerent military activity that could spiral into war. But I think the main island of Taiwan is safe for at least a little while.
Wow. So China's not quite the threat maybe that it was a year ago. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it poses a different threat, Brannon, and that is that Xi Jinping has configured the Chinese political system so that only the most hostile answers are considered acceptable. So if one of these provocations against South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, and faraway Australia, if one of them spirals into conflict, then I don't think that Xi Jinping can manage the situation. So I think that that's how war starts in East Asia, not by Xi Jinping waking up some morning and saying, we're attacking South Korea. It's basically because things get out of control. And I think the probability of things getting out of control is actually fairly high. So I worry about war, but I don't worry about war starting the way most people do. I just see it in a very different fashion, uncoordinated, unplanned, but nonetheless just as dangerous.
Let's talk about California and the protesters. We've got Trevor Loudon, who's been on here, talking about the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, Maoist-aligned type groups with their worldview. How much CCP money or Maoist organizations are funding these protests in California? And what are your concerns, if any, about these protests planned all across the country tomorrow, Saturday, June 14th?
I worry. Well, first of all, there's a lot of Chinese money going into the protest. You have Neville Roy Singman, his wife also. He's a billionaire, so he can pour a lot of money into it, and in fact, he has. But we got to put this in context, because we saw China fuel and foment protests in the United States in 2020. And then, there were, for instance, the night that St. John's Church was burned, the church one block away from the White House. That evening, there were Chinese protesters organized in obviously military fashion. acting in coordinated maneuvers. And people in the US government believe that that was actually Chinese agents on the streets committing acts of violence. But we also know that China used its propaganda organs to fuel the unrest in 2020, just as they're right today fueling the unrest in Los Angeles. So yes, this is an act of war against the United States. And we need the president of the United States to actually say this to the American people. Because, we have Xi Jinping. He talks about going to war all the time. And he's obviously getting both his military and civilians ready for war. He's been doing that now for 3 years in really fast fashion. We are at risk because we have, we haven't had a president willing to talk to the American people about what's going on.
Now, you don't know this, but I've been ranting and raving about that for 48 hours. I've been one of the few talk show hosts saying that President Trump, while I appreciate a lot of what he's doing, is not leading strongly in this area, that he needs to hold an Oval Office address, tell the American people what's going on, and warn them about the enemies inside our country and tell them to prepare.
Absolutely. Because we need the president to have that address to tell the American people. And we need the U.S. military to get a sense of urgency. They have this general notion that we got to prepare for war with China, but they don't do it with the sense of timing that is absolutely necessary. Because we could be at war at any time. Because, as I mentioned, China could lash out. Some belligerent act can go and spiral into conflict. We just need to be ready. And obviously we're not.
No, we're obviously not. Not when you have all these Chinese students here. And President Trump just put out a tweet that in part of his negotiations with Xi Jinping, he's going to let a bunch of them stay here. I'm thinking, aren't some of these spies? Aren't some of them grabbing up intellectual property? I mean, isn't this caving to the CCP to have, I'm not saying all the students from China, but isn't this been one of their ways to get into our country?
Oh, absolutely. And, we've known from surveys that a substantial portion of Chinese students do commit espionage. I mean, some people say it's as high as 13%. But we know that the Chinese networks are here, networks of operatives. They've been intruding into our military bases. They've been trying to gain access with false statements. There's been illicit surveillance of our bases. And of course, they've been surveilling our infrastructure. So they've been studying our patterns, looking for our vulnerabilities, and they are ready to strike. And I believe that the highest priority of the federal government right now should be breaking up those Chinese networks.
100%.
Because when those guys strike, they're going to take down our country. We're going to have to be at a point where Americans are going to have to rely on themselves. No electricity, no running water, no modern convenience, no car, no nothing. So this is going to be a very, very difficult situation if the Chinese strike.
Recently, the general in charge of Edwards Air Force Base, May 7th, gave a speech, about a 25-minute speech. I don't know if you've had the chance to see that. We played the whole thing here last Friday, I think it was. The general in charge, the commander, who's a brigadier general in charge of Edwards Air Force Base in California, gave 25-minute speech on the threats facing that base and the community around it. And he called in the community leaders and said, I believe if China were to go against Taiwan, one of the first things they would do is take down the power grid in America. I'm like, that's what Gordon Chang has been saying. And he brought in community leaders and gave the speech. And he talked to them about cyber attacks and all the different things going on, and that your cell phones will be down. And there's all these things he was saying. I'm like, this is what Gordon Chang's been warning about. Now, if we got a general in charge of Edwards Air Force Base bringing in and briefing the media and briefing local community leaders, isn't this the kind of speech, again, we should be hearing from the Oval Office to warn Americans? Because look at this map. All this Chinese-owned farmland in America. And I heard Dan Bongino, we played the video, we heard Dan Bongino say, I'm in my office a lot. it's kind of a tough job. My office is next to Kash Patel's. I'm staring at these four walls. He was kind of talking about how tough the job is. And I thought to myself, well, if you don't want to stare at the four walls anymore, then maybe you should get in the field and find out what's going on all this Chinese-owned farmland in America. And then you won't have to look at the four walls.
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. In September, a Chinese national tried to get into a U.S. nuclear weapons facility. Person was denied. Then he tried again the next day, and again he was denied. And then they didn't detain him. I think that someone like that should be sent to Guantanamo. The other thing is that at Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, which has the greatest concentration of F-35s, I believe, in the Air Force, because it's a training base. A Chinese man tried to rent warehouse space in a warehouse which was right up against the runway, one end of the runway. And he was denied, which is good. And then 6 months later, the same guy tries to get warehouse space at the other end of the runway. So we know what's going on here. So it's not just farmland. It's, the bigger question is, why do we allow civilian warehouses right up against runways of important Air Force bases?
Absolutely. Hold right there. When we come back, we'll ask Gordon Chang about the CCP agents sneaking in biological weapons. Don't go away.
Looking for a trusted source to understand today's world through a Christian worldview? Worldview Tube is built on the 35 years of Worldview books, columns, research, and high-profile interviews of Brannon Howse. Want to know more about Worldview Tube, its founder, history, team, and mission? Visit worldviewtube.com/about. That's worldviewtube.com/about. Worldview Tube is your source for understanding the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
Introducing the Sentry Wellness System, the ultimate under-sink water treatment solution designed with you in mind. Say goodbye to harmful toxins and hello to water enriched with essential nutrients like calcium and magnesium. Enjoy the benefits of increased pH for on-demand alkalinity, all from a zero-waste system that fits seamlessly into your home. Installation is a breeze, taking just 15 minutes, so you can have clean, healthy, great-tasting water straight from your tap. Perfect for apartments, homes, rentals, and even RVs. Elevate your hydration and well-being with the Sentry Wellness System because you deserve the best in every drop.
Sentry H2O. Tap into wellness.
Hello, I'm Brannon Howse. Melissa and I have been taking Bella Grace, this powerful elixir, since last fall, 2023. The results have been amazing. My hands would crack and bleed, deep cuts and cracks every winter for years. No matter what we did, we couldn't get them to stop cracking and bleeding. This year, I took Bella Grace, no cracking, no bleeding. My acid reflux, gone. Haven't had to take a Pepsid. My hair growth, the last two times I had my hair cut, the lady had to use thinning shears on my hair. That's amazing. We've also received incredible feedback from you, our listening audience, and the impact it's had for you. This is loaded with astaxanthin. That's a powerful antioxidant. Collagen, but top grade collagen. Studies show 95% of it is being absorbed in the body because of the way they develop it. Then we have something called cat's claw. That's an anti-inflammatory from a vine in Peru. It's the bark, and it's an anti-inflammatory. There are about 80 clinical trials on Bella Grace. Please get a subscription now and save. MelissaHousebg.com. We're back with Mr. Gordon Chang. You can follow him on X at Gordon G. Chang. We get the G in there, so you're following the right Mr. Chang, at Gordon G. Chang. Right before the break, you were talking about runways. People were trying to, CCP tied, people trying to get buildings at the end of runways. What do you think they were thinking about doing? Using maybe some man pads to take down an airplane? What do you think?
Could be that, Brannon. But, on June 1, we saw what the Ukrainians did to Russian bombers that were lined up on the tarmac. So all they'd have to do is, pop open the window and send out drones. So that's one thing that can be done. But there are all sorts of things that you can think of if you're sitting right next to the runway. So, yeah, whatever it is, it can't be good.
No, it can't be good. Now, what do you make? Two incidences in like a week of CCP-tied individuals trying to bring biological weapons into the U.S.?
Yeah, well, this is part of a bigger story, I think. In 2020, Americans in all 50 states received seeds from China unsolicited.
Wait, what?
This year,
what? You said what?
Seeds.
Americans just received seeds in the mail unsolicited.
From China. This year, Temu, which is the online Chinese retailer, has been sending seeds to Americans unsolicited. So I think that's an attempt to plant invasive species. What we saw in the Eastern District of Michigan, the 3 people who have been charged with trying to smuggle in biological agents. I think this is another attack on America's farms and ranches. We're going to learn a lot more as facts come out, but this can't be good. I mean, This was a weapon of mass destruction. And however this story plays out, we're going to learn a lot of very disturbing things about what China is doing. And by the way, why are we talking to China about trade when they are attacking our farms and our ranches? This just seems to me to be wrong.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. And do we still have no answers on the drones that were flying up and down the river off of Washington, D.C. for 17 nights in a row? Colonel Rob Maness was on it again today with me saying there was a 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, 1-star general standing up there watching it go by. And this went on for 17 nights, coordinated drones. And they're like, huh. And he said they did nothing about it. We still don't know anything about that. We were promised that we would find that out, I guess, when President Trump's administration came in. Doesn't seem like that's happened. And then you add Ukraine moving a truck into Russia and launching drones attacking his bombers, Putin's bombers. And then you look what Russia did. They moved a truck into Iran, let drones go, and attacked Iran. This seems to be the new way of warfare. And yet, we've got drones that have been flying all over the country in formation, and 4, 3, 2, and 1-star generals stand up there watching it going, that's interesting. I wonder what that's all about after 17 nights. And we still don't know. So is this the new way of warfare? And what percentage of these cargo containers are we screening that come in from China? Like 1%? At what point are these things loaded with drones, and or do we have a Club K cargo systems that the lid lifts up and out pops cruise missiles that I put in my documentary in 2018 on that, my documentary Sabotage. Are these things more probable now than ever?
Oh, well, certainly, because the Ukrainians shown the rest of the world that this is how the new way of warfare, and Russia was completely unprepared. And so are we. I mean, at Langley Air Force Base, there were those 3 or 4 nights where they were drone overflights, and the base commander couldn't do anything about it, just did not have the capability. And also, when we had all those drones over the state that I live in, which is New Jersey, we got the explanation from the Biden administration, which was then repeated by the Trump administration, saying, these are just all domestic drones. Well, I can understand a lot of them were domestic drones, but we also know something, and that is people in New Jersey watch drones enter American airspace from the Atlantic, and that could not have been domestic drones. There's some foreign power out there. We can argue, is it Russia? Is it China? Is it Iran? I don't know. But the story is, again, no good. And what's really concerning about this is not that it is concerning that a foreign power is assaulting our country with drones, but it's that our own government won't tell us the truth. And so here, I got a real problem. I suppose they don't want us to be panicked, but we could use a little bit of concern right now out of our own government. Forget about the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians. I want our government to start defending me because that's their job.
You and I are saying the same thing. We didn't rehearse it because, like I said, I've been asking for the last 2 days for President Trump to address the country from the Oval Office and ask Americans to be hyper vigilant, see something, say something, report it. Do not engage people in these protests coming up on Saturday. Don't get up in their faces. Don't provoke them. Don't fall for a trap. I don't know, again, if any of those protests will be taken advantage of. I pray they won't. No one's harmed. But I also know that I think a lot of Americans are not even aware of what we're talking about. I mean, if you follow news programs like this, you follow other networks that talk like this, that interview you, then maybe you are. But there's a lot of Americans that they've tuned in and turned out. You know, they don't do this anymore for whatever reason. And I think the president needs to bring them back to a hypervigilance. I know that after 9/11, we had all these colors for warning. I think we need to go back to saying something very simple. The colors don't make a lot of sense, too confusing. But, you know, maybe it's a 5 and we're on a scale of 3 now or whatever. But the president needs to, I think, right now, elevate our standing for security, at least until these rallies pass on Saturday, but maybe for the next couple of weeks while this is going down in Israel, in the Middle East. You know, we played a video, Mr. Chang, of a guy, former Black Panther guy, who went to jail and I guess converted to Islam while he was in there, saying, hey, you know, with these mosques, just the Friday prayers, we have one of the biggest standing armies around. And then he said, hey, I belong to this group. I run this group. It's all on video. He said, I run this group, and about half of them are Muslim. The other half are communist. They're revolutionaries. You know, they're anarchists. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, at least he's telling us, but we need our president and other leaders telling us, particularly if a general's bringing in the leaders of the community around Edwards Air Force Base and warning them. And he said this is a threat to all kinds of other bases, not just his. So again, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but don't you think when it hits the fan, we need Americans that are ready, not who are sitting there saying, I don't have food, I don't have water. Can you imagine the strain and stress on our local, state, and federal government then? That again creates more chaos that our enemies can take advantage of. But if more Americans are aware and are prepared, not only can we prevent something, but we can keep it from becoming a natural disaster that didn't need to happen with at least a percentage of the population, because they're fine and they're hunkering down and waiting for this to pass. What say you?
Yeah, today I just incidentally I posted on Twitter. I said to President Trump and to Border Czar Holman, I mean, their number one priority is breaking up these foreign networks of agents in our country because we know that they're here. I mean, just to give you an example, on Iran, President Biden had his deal with Iran on 9/11 of 2023. And what he did was he gave clemency to 5 Iranian operatives. Well, okay, but what was really unacceptable was that he allowed 3 of those operatives to stay in the U.S. at the same time that we know that Iran was trying to assassinate former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, former senior State Department official Brian Hook, and as we learned later, they were going after President Trump. So why would you allow Iranian operatives to stay in our country on those circumstances? And then we've got all of these Chinese who are really suspicious because they've been, as I mentioned, they've been pressuring us and they've been planning attacks. We need to break up those networks right away.
100%. The same reason, I'll say this in closing, the same reason we're saying, hey, look, Israel, if you feel threatened by Iran, then you can do what you need to do. But isn't it interesting, as I've been saying today, Israel is worried about the threats from Iran, particularly when you have Iran saying we're going to wipe Israel off the face of the earth and everything. Okay, these are existential threats to them. But what about the existential threats to our country that are not a country or two away or 1,000 miles away? They're right here, right now, with the red-green axis, the red being the Islamists, the green being the Marxists, who they're bragging that they're working together. I mean, Carlos the Jackal said you can only bring down America with a red-green alliance. And yet, there's just not a lot of people talking about the threats that we've been talking about tonight. Closing comment?
Yeah. If there's going to be a next war for the United States, it's going to be fought on American soil. This will be the first time since the War of 1812 that Americans will fight a foreign enemy in a sustained battle on their own soil. So it is going to come here, and we Americans need to be prepared. We have to assume that there's no electricity, there's no running water, that your car doesn't work, that you have to take care of yourself for perhaps as much as 6 months.
I agree. Look at, folks, you need to follow him right here at Gordon G. Chang, at Gordon G. Chang on X. You can also go to his website, gordonchang.com. And then if you go to Amazon, just type in Gordon G. Chang into Amazon. He has a ton of books, including a brand new one that I've interviewed him about, related to the Red Plan of China. Folks, get up to speed on these things. These also make great gifts for people that love to read and be informed. They don't come much better than Gordon Chang when it comes to so many of these topics. At Gordon G. Chang on X, or again, just put his name in to Amazon and order some of his books. Greetings to your wife, and thank you as always for being with us. And we're looking forward to having you as a keynote speaker at our 22nd annual national conference, October 3rd and 4th, just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. Looking forward to having you both with us in person.
We're looking forward to that too, Brannon. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you for accepting it. Have a great night. Mr. Gordon Chang checking in at Gordon G. Chang right there, folks. We appreciate him so very much. And we'll be right back after this break.
I'll tell you one little quick story. We had a Worldview Weekend client who lived in California, lost their house. Very wealthy guy. He didn't use Bitcoin. He came over here, drove to Arizona with $286,000 worth of his gold because he had no money and no house available. His bank was shut down because he couldn't have access to his bank account.
Was this during the fire? Was this during the fires?
During the fire. Didn't have his driver's license. He lost it. The state wouldn't give him a new license because he had no active mailing address. Real mess. So he came to Arizona to buy a house. He's moving everything over. He said, the only thing I got in my possession that I can get liquid with right now is my gold. I gave him a check for $286,000, and guess what? I didn't need his social, his driver's license. Sort of smiled, and I said, you know, I know you and Brannon talked about how this worked, but boy, this is great. I feel good. I got my money. Nobody bothered me, and I'm protected, and it's private.
Just simply go to worldviewgold.com, fill out the form, worldviewgold.com.